This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here's the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. I am, in fact, the host, Kevin Randle, and I'll be joined just momentarily by Rob SWIATEK, whose biography I left downstairs. So I'll just have to wing it when I bring him on, I guess. I've received a boatload of mail, which is probably one, suggesting that members of the audience would like us to do something a little bit more recent in the discussion of UFOs. I've been focused in the past. I think the reason for that is because many of the best cases, the most robust cases, are from the past. And in today's environment, we don't get the kind of information, the kind of investigation, the kind of sightings that we had in the past. And so I've been focusing on that. The Roswell case obviously is important. Level Land, which is important in itself, and other cases like that. And I mentioned Level Land specifically because I think it is one of the most important cases. And that is because of the interaction of the UFO with the environment, causing car engines to stall, radios filled with static, multiple witnesses. In fact, Robert Schaefer, who was on the program not that long ago, a man I think is a reasonable skeptic as opposed to some of the rabid debunkers. I asked him what he would accept in the way of evidence, and he said a good case with multiple witnesses and additional chains of evidence, photographs, radar tracks, something like that. Level Land had all that, except for the photographs. It had the interaction with the environment. It had a landing trace case. It had multiple witnesses, literally dozens who reported their car stalling, and hundreds, according to the sheriff, had called in to report the object in the area. So we had that going for it. It involved quite a few law enforcement officers, and it involved some Air Force officers whose, I guess, participation in the case wasn't really noticed until basically I wrote the book on Level Land and discovered some documentation suggesting the Air Force was there. The real point is the Air Force blew it off. The investigation lasted 7 hours, and they decided it was ball lightning. Obviously a nonsensical answer. Anyway, with that thought in mind, I bring that up because some of the cases we'll be discussing today are much more modern, including one from July 2nd of this year that involved electromagnetic effects. Rob SWIATEK, who has been around UFOs nearly as long as I have, is a board of directors member for the Mutual UFO Society, UFO organization, the Mutual UFO Network. I went back to its early incarnation as Midwest in my brain there for some reason. He has done an awful lot of work, investigation, and is considered one of the experts in the field of UFOs because we all refuse to call them UAP for some reason. Anyway, welcome to the program, Rob SWIATEK.
Hi, Kevin. Good to be on your program.
Anything you'd like to add to that rather botched bibliography?
Well, yeah, I have been in almost as long as you have, and in the UFO field, and been around with the. I'm on the board of the Mutual UFO Network. I've been there for about 20 years, and I'm also, full disclosure, on the board of the National UFO Historical Records Center in Rio Rancho, New Mexico.
That would be Dave Mahler's.
That'd be Dave Mahler's organization.
Yeah, which I think is a wonderful idea.
Yeah.
And I want to
maybe we can talk about that a little bit because we have some big things coming up with that too. So
we certainly could. My thoughts were, because of the query about doing older UFO cases, we'd kind of move it forward. And I came across a couple of cases of electromagnetic effects that are much more recent. One of them was featured in the MUFON Journal a number of months ago, a number of years ago, about a sighting in Canada. Can you fill us in on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I could, but I can't. I was unable to access the detailed information on that case. That would be the dumbbell case there with the hunters, and
Yes.
I just I'm wary of saying something that's completely wrong or not correct. So and not having looked at that case, so I apologize for that. And I did have advance warning this was coming, so couldn't find it.
The case, as you said, involved a number of hunters that saw a dumbbell-shaped UFO in Canada in 2016, I believe.
That's probably about right. I went back to about 2018.
So they talked about trying to record it with their cell phones, and they couldn't get any
It's coming back to me, right?
video on it, but they got sound. And so they had the kind of an EM effect there. I think MUFON investigated. I think Robert Powell
Right.
was involved in the investigation and thought it was a pretty solid case.
Yeah, I never heard anything negative or nothing ever came up refuting what has already been put on the record and in the CMS system on the case. And yeah, Robert Powell, I think, was with MUFON up to about 2017. So yeah, it would have predated that date.
So we've kind of botched this investigation here between the two of us. I wasn't sure exactly when it appeared in the MUFON Journal. I just remembered it being important because of the electromagnetic effects, the number of witnesses involved. There were several witnesses involved in the case. It was a large object that hovered for a period of time and caused problems with their cell phones. And the reason it caught my attention originally is a number of people had said to me that they were surprised that with all the cameras available, we all carry a very good camera now in our pockets with our cell phones, and we weren't getting any really exciting video of UFOs. And that was one of the cases I looked at because they attempted to get that kind of video and the cell phone failed them for some reason. Worked fine before, worked fine afterwards, but there was no video available, just the sound of the object and I guess their discussion of what they were seeing.
Yeah. There's a lot of videos taken of UFOs with cell phones. Usually they're close of the first kind. They're kind of far away, but we get some pretty close up ones. Which is to say over a neighbor's house, this type thing, or from something that's pretty close. But man, I probably could come up with 20 fairly good videos that have been taken within the last 5 years, 6 years that do show anomalous objects.
Give us an example of one of those.
Well, one of them would be a really good case from October of 2021, I believe it was. And it was a woman flying in first class in an airplane, an airliner. She was on a trip to visit her husband, and he was in Texas. And the incident took place over Texas, over a place called Skellytown, Texas. And she wasn't expecting to be in first class, and she was bumped up to first class when she started the boarding process. And I don't know her exact position. Figure in either the military or the DOD, maybe a civilian, but anyhow, being bumped up to first class meant she had to rearrange her stuff because and this later comes into play, she had a cell phone and some other things, and she had to put it in a little pouch or whatever they have on the side of the aircraft wall there. Since she was sitting in the very first seat in the airplane, she couldn't put anything under her feet, so she had to store it in this temporary thing they put on the wall of the airplane. And she's flying along. All the other people have their shades pulled down, and she likes to look out. And she suddenly sees a dark contrail out, would be the left-hand side. She was sitting on that part of the airplane. A dark contrail pass by the aircraft, angled away from the aircraft. It wasn't paralleling the aircraft. It was obliquely oriented relative to it. There's another airplane here that's going down. It's having engine problems or something. I better get some kind of a video or a picture of this thing. At least I'll have something to show the investigators if there is a crash. And she was horrified. She reached around to get her phone, and geez, she forgot it was in that thing on the side, and she had to reach over there and pull it out of that pocket. And she got one picture of this thing, this contrail. And at that point, the object creating the contrail was already fairly far in advance of her airplane. She could see the end of the contrail, where it began, and then extending backward from it, of course. She snapped one photo of it, and that was it. It was, by the time she got, she just couldn't take any more photos, and it was already gone or too small or something like that. And she wanted to alert other people to it, but she thought, man, I'll be considered a crazy person if I suddenly go up and down the aisles of the airplane saying, people, look out your windows. There's an airplane going down. She just said, reluctantly, I didn't do anything.
And of course, the photo has been analyzed by.
The photo was analyzed by, well, MUFON investigators were on this case pretty quickly, but even before they had a chance to look at it, she of course looked at the photo once she landed, or subsequent to the sighting, let's put it that way. And amazingly enough, what the photo shows is a black contrail with an object at the head of the contrail, and it's not an aircraft. It's an ovoid object, seemingly made out of metal and reflecting the sun, out of which this contrail is being emitted. It's a great photograph. You can see the window of the aircraft about it, and we have her flight number. We know when the aircraft landed. We don't have any other witnesses, but this woman wrote a separate description of what she saw to the MUFON investigators and was entirely cooperative with the investigation.
Was the photograph published in the MUFON journal or anywhere?
Yeah, I believe it was published in the MUFON journal. I'm almost positive, in something we called Cases of Interest, that was published by a woman named, was written by a woman named Shelley Goodman every month. She'd profile 5 or 6 cases, and I'm an editor of the journal, so I look through them all and check them all out. But that case was one of them. But I have brought this case to Dave McDonald's attention. He's the head of MUFON. I've given it to other people. I believe I gave it to Robert Powell, because I do think it is a very significant case and a very significant photograph that should be seen by members of Congress, if not AARO. I mean, it's not a trivial photograph. It's something.
Well, let me break you off here, because we're.
That's all I have to say. And
yeah, I'm bumping up against the hard break here, so I've got to go.
Right, understood.
Got to go. My blog, by the way, for those of interest, is kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're interested in these kind of cases, electromagnetic cases, take a look at the book Level Land, because it involves a discussion of a great number of the cases focusing on the Level Land sightings of November of 1957. I will be back right after this with Rob SWIATEK talking about EM effects and UFOs, so stick around. And I am here with Rob SWIATEK talking about UFOs, because I refuse to call them UAP. What's your take on that, Rob? Are you interested in the UAP stuff, or are you sticking with UFO?
I'll stick with UFO stuff.
I always thought that UAP is a way of divorcing what they're doing today with what has gone on in the past. We're just junking the history of the whole phenomenon by creating a new acronym. What is your take on that? Yeah,
my take on that is that acronym goes back pretty far. And of course, we had the NICAP, National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena, and APRO, Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization. And so basically, they may not have used the U in it all the time, but it's not really a new acronym. As to why they've chosen to use that, I would sort of agree with you. Unburden themselves, as it were, from what has gone before. They haven't succeeded in that, but I just think they see, using a new acronym will mean we've somehow turned the corner on this thing. It makes no sense to me. But there you have it.
I will say that APRO used, I think it was UAO for unidentified aerial object.
Right.
So it's sort of out there. I think the problem with UFO has now become synonymous with alien spacecraft, and we all know UFO really means unidentified flying object.
Right. Yeah, they chose UFO in general to avoid reference to flying saucers, and now they're using UAP to avoid reference to UFOs or UFO. So we can only wonder, Kevin, what's coming down the pike for the next acronym.
Well, when we look at the acronyms they've come up with some of the investigations lately, it's going to be cumbersome and unpronounceable. Arrow works out, but you go into some of the things they've been talking about, and you really can't get a handle on what the acronym means.
Mm-hmm.
Getting back to the program here, so to speak, I had found a sighting. Actually, I should really preface by saying Stan Gordon found a sighting on his website, and he's Stan Gordon's anomalous zone, I believe, as he calls it. And I've mentioned his stuff before because it's a good source for a lot of paranormal phenomenon as well as just UFOs. And he's got a sighting from just July 2nd of this year. I keep looking away because that's where my notes are on this one, my highlighted notes. But what happened was apparently a guy traveling in Pennsylvania, his car suddenly stopped, just engine turned off, and he coasted to a stop, and he saw a large object. He said it was a large black object overhead, about 300 feet above him, and it was very large. He watched it for a while. He thought about getting a picture with his cell phone, and he finally did, but the object was too far away, so he didn't get much of a picture, kind of like the incident you were talking about. Mm-hmm. After the object was gone, he noticed another car was there, and he went back to talk to the driver, and the guy said that his car had stopped the same way. So we've got the electromagnetic fence stuck in the car. Talks about an object that is more cylindrically shaped, I guess, as opposed to a saucer shaped or some or tic-tac shape. Really not a cigar shaped either, because it said it looked more like a pipe, a big pipe. So they got out of the car. They discussed it a little bit. They actually called Stan Gordon, and he was not that far away. So he actually went out there that very night. The cars were still there on the scene, checked it for any magnetic properties or changes, and couldn't find anything. But one of the drivers had called the auto club because he couldn't get his car started again after the thing left. So they were talking about that, and he tried the cars again, and they both started up. So he canceled the auto club about that. But the interesting thing here is, unfortunately, they're not quite the independent witnesses that Robert Schaefer had talked about, because they did converse with one another, and then Stan Gordon kind of talked to them while they were both there, so they weren't as independent as they could be. They do have a photograph, which apparently is not real good, but a photograph nonetheless, and we have the interaction with the environment. So it's an interesting case like that. Not quite as important as Level Land because of the number of witnesses at Level Land, but it's still a significant case. So wouldn't you agree with that?
I agree 100%. Yeah, the Level Land case and some of the other cases that occurred around that same time were, of course, classic cases in UFO history. They don't occur every day. They don't even occur every decade, but we have them on record.
Well, MUFON has been investigating UFOs for quite a while now. I think from the late 1960s on, when it began.
Yeah. And
it probably has a wonderful database. Are you familiar with some other electromagnetic cases that have been reported that?
Yeah. Let me give you a recent one here. Again, not quite as recent as the Stan Gordon case, which I did read the synopsis of that case, and it is quite interesting and good. A case that occurred in Florida just this past December 5th, outside of a place called Umatilla, I think might be the way it's pronounced, Umatilla. A woman was driving was driving back home, and was about 13 or 14 miles from home, going along State Road 19, I think it is, in Florida there, headed north. And she has a dog in the car with her in the back seat. And suddenly the dog lets out a startled yelp. There's a terrific noise in the car of like a metal shrieking noise. I'm not quite sure how you would generate such a noise, but like maybe metal being sawed or ripped or something like that. But it was a very painful sound. And immediately upon hearing She was behind an 18-wheeler truck, and there was some oncoming traffic in the other lane, left-hand lane, I guess it would have been. And immediately upon hearing that metal rending sound, a triangular UFO flies from left to right over her automobile, large triangular UFO. And as it's going by before it gets to the car, or maybe immediately after it's gotten from the car, I'm not quite sure the sequence of this, but the object was so low that it apparently clipped off a tree. The text says cut it in half. Okay, not sure what that means, but anyhow, it clips off this tree top and flies out of sight immediately. 2 F-16s are on the tail of the thing, right behind it, and her car stops. The truck stops in front of her. The other cars pull over on the side of the lane. She gets out of the car, and and same as the other people do who've now gotten out of their both ears in the oncoming cars. A car behind her, a woman got out. This sounds horrible, but this is what the description says. She had urinated on herself. The truck driver got out of the 18-wheeler, and he was bleeding from well, I think he was bleeding from both ears, and the other guy was bleeding just from one ear, but they had the same kind of injury. One of the fellows just got out of the car, and he was just sitting by his car crying. They were also essentially traumatized by this episode. And there it ends. She drove home. They all gathered themselves together and went on their separate ways. Nobody got addresses of the other people. Unfortunately, I guess they were all so upset. She drove the 14 miles to her house. This occurred at 12:45 in the afternoon. We're not talking nighttime here. Her husband was there. She was extremely upset. He said, we've got to go back out there and find what we can on the site. Well, they couldn't locate the tree that was cut off, unfortunately. Of the other people who had seen the cars to follow up on. So there is really not too much to add to this case. The dog was all right. The investigator did do a magnetic survey of the car to find out how it compared with a magnetic survey taken of the same model car that he found in an automobile dealership. He went over there and he finally found the same car. And he did a scan with a magnetometer or something, or a handheld one, and also did the scan of her car. And the magnetisms were different. Her car was skewed. The magnetism was higher on one side of the car and lower on the other than the control car. So that's about the only thing we have that can really back up evidentially what occurred here. They never found the tree and don't know the other people. The woman checked out to be quite a good witness. She had been in the Air Force before, knew what she was talking about. MUFON had 3 or 4 investigators go out to their house, and the MUFON people attempted to find the spot. They couldn't find it either. And it was right off 2 or 3 miles from something called a Pine Castle training area or training region that is run by the Air Force. So it's an area that does have a lot of military activity going on around it. He was satisfied with the investigator was satisfied with the credibility of the woman and had no reason to doubt what she was saying. And that's where the case stands.
Well, the one thing I want to point out here, it sounds kind of ludicrous for the investigator to go out and look for a same model car to magnetically map it to see how it compares with hers. Mm-hmm. But what I'll say is the Condon Committee, when they were investigating these sorts of cases, actually proposed that exact thing, is to magnetically map the car and see how it compares, because the same model of cars would have sort of the same magnetic signature because of the manufacturing of them. And I've always done this now since I'd read that in the Condon Committee, gone out and magnetically mapped my car with a handheld compass to see what spot where it points in the car to see if it changes. If I ever get stopped by a UFO, never happened, but I'm probably the only person in the world who actually does that. But the real point, but the real
some
point is,
MUFON investigators do that. Like you say, it's sort of in the handbook. Let's put it that way.
well, but the real point is, this is not something that has been cobbled together by a bunch of amateurs who don't know what they're talking about. The idea actually, I think, came from physicists working with the Condi Committee back in the late 1960s. So it's a way of gathering additional evidence of this sort of activity. Her car was stalled, you say. Did she have to start the car to get it going again, or did it automatically start?
That's a question I don't have the answer to that. The cars all started then, and they drove off. But as to whether they started by themselves, that I don't know. I just, that occurred to me today, and I think I will contact the investigator on this to find out if that's
the reason I bring that up. One of the reasons the Condi Committee rejected these sorts of ideas is they could think of no way, if you use a magnetic field to stop a car engine, when you remove that field, the car would spontaneously start. And I went through an awful lot of the reports that Mark Roediger had gathered in his vehicle interference.
Right, I have that.
And I found very few where it they mentioned it spontaneously started. Normally the driver has to take some action. In Levelland, I think one guy said his car started spontaneously, but everybody else was saying, well, my car would operate normally. I could start my car normally. So I thought that's probably a question that should be asked of anybody who reports an electromagnetic effect, just to gather that kind of data.
Yeah.
Let me, I gotta break in. I cannot believe it. It's gone this quickly. I'm here with Rob SWIATEK from the MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. We're talking about some modern cases, and we're focusing sort of on electromagnetic effects because I think that's an important aspect or subset of the UFO field. I will be back with Rob right after this, so please stick around. And I'm back with Rob SWIATEK, surprisingly. Didn't go away quite long enough, did we there, Rob? Caught you.
Check my notes. I wanted to bring up another case.
Well, let's get right into it then.
This is another odd one. It's not quite EM case, but it's a physical case that occurred very recently, just a couple months ago. I think it was in June in New Jersey. A fellow was at work outside, had been he suddenly sees an odd object go across the sky, and long story short, it lands at some distance from him outside some woods. And so he's wondering what this thing is. He walks over there, and sure enough, it is the classic disc-shaped object, Kevin, sitting on 3 legs. I think it wasn't quite a Socorro case, but it was a disc on legs. As he approached it, a beam, the old story, a beam shot out and engulfed him or hit him. And then the object departed, left. He turned around and went home, or went back to his job. And that was a very short sighting, a minute or two, and the object was gone after hitting him with this light. Well, the next morning, he's taking a shower at home, and his wife just lets out a gasp and says, "What did you do to your back? What's wrong with your back?" And he didn't know anything about it. He didn't have any kind of pain or anything. And sure enough, she took a photograph of it. And there's a large spade shaped, like on an ace of spades, a spade shaped blotch on the back of his card with the stem of the spade pointing downwardly. And it's more on on the terminus between his back and almost under his arm. It's right on, maybe on the curve of his body there, like that. And it's 3 inches long. We have several photographs of it. The fellow did not go to the doctor. He had problems with the insurance or something, and he just didn't end up going. And we have photographs of this thing, and it eventually sort of faded away, or did fade. I assume by now, 2 months later, 3 months later, it is gone. But the clothes were not disturbed. He didn't feel any pain. Whether these were just 2 coincidental things occurring together, I do not know. But it's one of the few bodily trace evidence cases that we have lately.
Well, you mentioned the thing was sitting on the ground on a tripod landing gear. What you say a classic flying saucer? Did it have a dome on it, a dome disc?
Yeah. Well, he does have it looked like he in his drawing, it had a kind of a disc or a copulon or something like that, a very shallow one. But yeah, there was some structure there on the drawing.
And did he see any beings associated with this?
There were no beings, just the object itself.
Did he have an idea where the beam originated on the craft?
It just came from the craft, and I asked the investigator, did it hit him in the back or did it hit him in the front? And I didn't get a clear answer from him. I assume the beam hit him in the front because his written description does not say I started running away from the thing and then it shot a beam at me. I don't know how you would know if you had your back to it, but anyhow, I assume it hit him from the front. It's unusual to have the results of a beam hitting you on your back and not at the initial point of contact in most cases.
Were there any traces left on the ground from the landing gear?
That again, the investigator didn't put any.
Well, do we know if he asked the question?
I cannot tell you. I do not know. I simply found out about this case about a week ago, and
so it's good. It's current news.
It's very current news. I'm not sure we're going to get much back, but again, these like you pointed out with Leveland, these cases of beams hitting people and inflicting injuries on them do happen. Not frequently, but they do happen once or twice a decade, maybe. But they're not unknown. We can pick, other cases. The helicopter case in Texas in 1980, the Cash Landrum, and
well, that wasn't really a beam that
but
hit
it was a light, that seemed to give these people.
It was a close approach of something.
Right, and the same thing with the this Manitoba case in 1967, Michalak, I think it was, where purple light or something from a landed object that he actually went right up to, and gas from a vent hit him. It's not light, but it was some kind of an exhaust or something, and burned him badly.
And we do have photographs of
radiation illness.
Yeah, we have photographs of the grid-like pattern on his body. So
and the National UFO Historical Record Center now has Michalak's gloves, I found out, and a piece of the shirt.
Well, the other thing I should point out, and I hesitate to do so only because I'm going back into the 1950s, wanted to keep things current here, is in France. In 1954, there was an awful lot of sightings of the craft on the ground, and there were any number of cases where the witnesses reported being hit by some kind of a beam that paralyzed them for a moment or stopped them from moving closer to the craft. And when the craft was gone, then they could move again. The paralysis, I should say, sort of evaporated at that time. So it's not uncommon it's not unusual for us to hear about those sorts of cases. We just have to look at the whole compendium of ufology, which brings up another irrelevant thought almost. The first case of an electromagnetic effect stalling a car or a engine, that goes back to 1909. So it's something that we've looked at for almost the entire history of UFO. It's just something that is kind of rare in the overall picture.
Right, but it's like you say, it's a part of the phenomenon, and it consistently remains part of the phenomenon. It's not like a real phenomenon would behave in that way. It doesn't change too much. Its characteristics as the years go by.
And Len Stringfield, of course, who is responsible for all the discussion of crash retrievals, reported that he was on an aircraft flying from Iwo Jima to Japan right at the end of the Second World War. And the engines on the C-47, I think it was, began to sputter. And the pilot warned him that we may have to ditch. And Stringfield saw three objects outside the window of the aircraft. And when they moved away from those three objects, or the three objects moved away from them, the engines began to function properly again, and they continued their trip. So it is something that is well known inside of ufology.
Right. Yeah, there are other cases, very, very rare, those where the airplane itself has engine trouble as a result of the UFO encounter, but they do exist.
Yeah, and The Coin helicopter case we've talked about, I don't think they had really any engine problems, but they had manifestations. The radio communication with, I think, Mansfield Airport ceased for a period of time, and Coin was trying to dive underneath the object and had put the collective down and entering a dive. And the next thing they knew, the aircraft was now 3,000 feet above where it had been. Phil Klass explained that because he'd never been in flight school or flown helicopters, that the co-pilot had realized they were about to fly on the ground and he lifted the collective. And I say, no, that would have never happened because both pilots had been through the same training I did. And if you saw something that affected the safety of the aircraft, you would then say, I've got it, and take it away from the person who's flying. The other guys say, you've got it. And then the co-pilot could have lifted the collective. You do that so that you don't have the guys fighting each other on the controls. Just realize what the problem is and fighting to maintain control of the aircraft. But it's drilled into us religiously. And I can say, you would say, well, the helicopter case was a high stress situation, so maybe they didn't follow procedures. And I would say, and counter that, we followed them in combat, which I think is a much more highly stressed situation than seeing a UFO close at hand. So I think that kind of an argument. So
it was the old meteor, I think, and Phil Klass said for
Phil Klass. Phil Klass would explain things no matter how odd they were. But Phil Klass's explanations often were no better than the Air Force's explanations.
Yeah, that's for sure. And yeah, he followed in the path of Menzel doing the same kind of thing.
Well, I don't understand Menzel, rabid anti-UFO belief structure. With Klass, I think I know what happened. I think that he proposed these ionizations of the atmosphere that happens all the time, but they don't glow unless they're acted on by something else. And he proposed this as an explanation for a number of UFO sightings, and atmospheric physicists and UFO people, especially Dr. James McDonald, criticized this. And I think Klass was now playing a bit of catch up. Well, I'm going to show you there is no such thing like this, so you guys are all wrong in what you're doing. I think it was kind of a personal vendetta on the part of Klass. I don't know what meant.
Yeah, well, that could very well be. And I think with that sort of as an entree to my next statement, I see Arrow and whatnot. They seem to be following. And again, I read your rather excellent post. Just seem to be going down the same road with Arrow. They're headed, Arrow's headed toward Blue Book or something like that, and they're using the same kind of behavior to just push aside and normalize and minimize the UFO problem. And it really is a problem, but the Air Force and Arrow doesn't seem to recognize that.
Well, I think we go back into the late 1940s, the first time that they began rejecting the idea of any kind of alien visitation. We look at the Robertson panel from 1953, where they spent a week discussing it, sponsored by the CIA, by the way, discussing UFOs, and the people from Blue Book were there, Hynek was there, and the panel ends on a Friday afternoon. I think early on, so people catch their flights out. Robertson had the final report written the next day.
That's right.
And Michael Swords had pointed that out, had it written the next day, which suggests that the panel was just eyewash and this is what they were going to put out, but there was nothing to it. We need to stop being interested in it. We look at the Condon Committee, the same thing, where the conclusions were written prior to the investigation. So the Arrow is just kind of a continuation of what we've seen for literally decades of rejecting UFOs.
Hey, Kevin, I wish I had a chance to get those charts in, but I understand you couldn't get these recent charts I prepared and get them in time. But I was wanted to know, let folks know who are watching, how many kind of cases we're dealing with each month, at least that MUFON is dealing with. And I even have the MUFON versus NUFORC rundown of case totals. I'm not going to go through every figure here, but I have it for about the last year or so.
Well, let me interrupt here because I'm running up against the deadline here. I can put the charts up on my blog for those who are interested to look at them, and in the context of what you're about to say here, so that they'll have an idea of how the reports are running in today's environment as opposed to in the past. The blog, once again, is kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And while I got you people listening, take a look at some of the books I've done, including Roswell in the 21st Century and Understanding Roswell, which is a compendium of the information I've gathered with the assistance of Tom Carey and Don Schmidt. We've all done books about Roswell, I think, that are important books to understanding that very complex case, which I think kind of set the tone for the investigations to follow in the years to come. I will be back with Rob SWIATEK right after this. Sorry about that, Rob. So please stick around. And I am here with Rob SWIATEK, one of the board of director members of the Mutual UFO Network. I think it's the only functioning national organization in the United States at the time. Is that correct?
Run by Robert Powell, who does UFO research, and of course the CUFOS. But yeah, MUFON is the only one that does large numbers of investigations.
Well, I was going to say CUFOS is not as active as it was a number of years ago because of funding and that sort of thing. And Powell's organization, I think, is a little bit more scientifically oriented and limited in its membership, as opposed to MUFON, which is much, much larger and has a worldwide
that's true.
Access. That was kind of my thought. Before we went away, you're going to discuss some of the differences in reporting of UFOs or sightings and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Sometimes there's similarities. I'll look down here at my chart I made, and if you put those up, that would be great. And I thank you in advance. But people can check out the month-by-month breakdowns I have here. But let's just put it, I'll be pretty short here. I did it for September of 2023 through August of 2024, a year span. MUFON had, including their international cases, almost 3,000 cases in that period of time. 2963 is the actual number. And months, not events that were reported to MUFON in those months that might have occurred 10 years before. They were what we call event-dated cases. And NUFORC had, in the same period of time, 3,000.
I'm sorry, when you say NUFORC, you're referring to the National UFO Reporting Center?
The National UFO Reporting Center. Yeah, I forget.
Just to
not
clarify.
Everybody knows. And NUFORC is the acronym.
Yes.
And they can be found at nuforc.org. And you can see these numbers and their cases. And they had about 3,100 cases in the same time period. MUFON had a case management system. We had our computers shut down for 3 months this year, from February through April. So we had a minimum number of cases that have come through since that period for those 3 months. But nonetheless, the two organizations are roughly equivalent in the number of sightings they take in. Sightings always sort of go up in the summer months and the warm months when people are outside, and they go down in the winter. And the trend is sort of showing this time with these charts. MUFON had a high case number of 555 cases last September, and in August of 24, just passed, we're standing at 239, and some more cases for that month will probably be coming in, even though they will be filed in September.
Well, do you know why there's such a decrease in cases between last year and this year?
That I can't explain. I do not know why it should be so high for last September and an August month, which is summer, and people still tend to be outside during those months. It's just a lower number. And the same trend occurred with NUFORC had 239 cases in September, and I might have misspoken. MUFON had 168. So both organizations sort of show a decrease in cases for a summer month.
Could one of the reasons be that people are somewhat more sophisticated now and not reporting things that in the past they would have reported as UFOs? They now recognize these sorts of things. Starlink satellites, for example, I think are much more known to the public. And I know there used to be a lot of reports where it was Starlink satellites or the launches of the space rockets.
Well, that sort of is one. I'll flip to another chart here. Now, these were total cases that MUFON and NUFOR received, but I'll focus on MUFON. Total cases before they've been investigated. So the question then you would ask is, well, how many of those cases turned out to be unknowns? Well, I have the answer to that.
well, you should have let me ask, because I was going to ask that question.
I knew you were going to do that. I read your mind. And no, but for example, I even have numbers on. Well, I'm not going to look around here for the total number I have. But for example, in September 2023, MUFON had 459 U.S. cases as opposed to 555 international cases, U.S. plus international. So 459 U.S. cases, 81 were unexplained, coming out to about a 17.6% unknown rate. The case number went down from September. In November of 2023, 251 sightings, 50 unknowns. In May of 2024, 5 months ago, MUFON recorded 269 cases. Their system was back up and working in May, and they had 47 unknowns. Again, an unknown rate of about 17.5%.
Well, let me interrupt here for
all aboard the people with, anybody watching with more figures, but you will see them when Kevin posts it.
I wanted to interrupt here with kind of a comparison. Blue Book said that the unknowns were, I think, 7.1%, 7.3% of their investigation of their 12,000 cases over the years.
Yeah, they had 701 unknown. Yeah,
701 unknowns. Mm-hmm. And just over 12,000 cases they investigated. What I did a quick survey of the Blue Book files because there were a number of cases that were labeled as insufficient data for scientific analysis, which means they're not identified, but they're not put in the unidentified case. And roughly about half the cases that they investigated, especially later in their investigations, were labeled as insufficient data for scientific analysis. One from Austin, Texas, that caught my mind. The witness saw the UFO. He signaled with a flashlight, and the UFO seemed to respond to that signal, and his dog kind of reacted to the UFO. It was labeled as insufficient data, and the guy wrote to the Blue Book, and he said, "What's insufficient data? You've got all the information." The lieutenant came in, gathered in great detail the information from me. Why is it labeled insufficient data? And they changed it to unidentified, which I think is rather interesting that they actually did that. But it also shows that sometimes they would label a case as insufficient data when they didn't have a good explanation. There was another case, and it's up on my blog, from March and April of, I think, 1952 in Baltimore, where they wrote it off as kind of a hoax because they had interviewed people about the sighting on the date it supposedly happened, and nobody had heard it, nobody had seen anything. Turns out they had the date wrong. And so you go back like 10 days earlier, and yes, there were other witnesses involved. There was a good information about that thing, but they labeled it as a hoax simply because they investigated it on the wrong date.
Yeah, Hynek goes through some length, an interesting length, I will say, in his book, The UFO Experience, to talk about how how the Blue Book people manipulated these cases to minimize the amount of unknowns, and I have no doubt the same thing is occurring today. Real quick here, Kevin, the last chart I wanted to explain was the shapes of arrow UFO cases versus the same shapes in the MUFON database. I got this off the Arrow website, and I won't go through all the figures on this, but there's only a few shapes of cases listed on the Arrow website. One of them is completely ununderstandable. They have orb, round, and sphere, and then square and polygon, triangle, disc, cylinder, oval, tic-tac shape, and other. Okay. MUFON system, and son of a gun, if all the categories, they're eerily close. These are non-investigated, all cases investigated and non-investigated cases. In other words, they're not just unknown cases that I picked from MUFON. I picked, just like Arrow, they don't tell the viewer or the reader how many cases were unknown. They don't even tell the total case number. I had to pick around some other documents, and I think it's around 300. And so I used the same kinds of cases from MUFON, uninvestigated cases, which were probably around 3,000. But the categories all come out equal, not equal, but closer than I would have thought. Arrow said there were 3% were square or polygon. Polygon in Arrow's case does not include triangle. And MUFON, same thing. Polygons excluding triangles were 3.9%. Arrow said they had 5% were cylindrical. MUFON had 7.6%. Tic-tac shapes, Arrow 2%. MUFON 2.9%. And I took MUFON cases over the whole year 2023. The Arrow cases go from 1996 to 2023. There's a hodgepodge of, and it's not scientific. They don't do a good job, but that was the closest I could do to come up with, to see how these figures fell out.
Well, I will get those charts up on my blog so people can take a look at it and make what they want out of the data, because I think it's important to look at that sort of thing. I would think that the blobs and circular and that sort of thing might be sort of the same thing. People just describing them in different terms, the same sort of phenomenon.
Absolutely. I think the UFO field has long had a problem, and this includes going back to the 50s. They don't define the terms, and now we have the category tic-tac. Well, what shape really is that? Where did the tic-tac sightings go as true UFOs before 2017? They must have gone into cylindrical
or cigar shaped.
Or cigar shaped, but a cigar is a cylinder.
Yes.
And but yeah, we have these problems, and Arrow even has a category called sensor pickups or sensor they recorded a sensor reading or a sensor image. Again, they don't say what they mean by that. They have it in there with shapes, sensor acquisition.
Well, I'll take it that you're saying that you're not real impressed with the Arrow report.
These are educated, presumably, people in science and engineering. And this is the kind of chart they give us with no definitions for this stuff. And triangles are not considered polygons, or they don't say that they put squares and polygons in one category and triangles in another. So a triangle is a polygon. What the hell, Well,
listen, Rob, I'm out of time. I can't do anything about it. I've run out of time. Thank you for taking your time this afternoon. I really appreciate some of the cases you mentioned from the MUFON files that haven't got a lot of publicity. I think that'll entice some of our listeners toward joining MUFON. You just go to MUFON.com and it'll walk you through the membership process if you're interested in doing that, or giving you additional information about the organization. Okay. Well, thank you, Rob. I got to run. Can't help it. I am back. I don't have time to wrap it up intelligently, so I'll just say go to Amazon.com, look for my books, or buy books by Eric Helm, because that'll help me out as well. I'll be back next week talking to a guy who is really impressed with the Kingman UFO case. So come back next week. Thank you for hanging with us.